What if you discovered that the Gill-Man costume directly led to saving Predator's production, or that a 5-year-old actress turned down Fatal Attraction to battle vampires? From Liam Neeson's lost Dracula role to creature suits that brutally punished their actors, The Monster Squad, 1987, hides decades of bizarre production secrets beneath its kid-friendly Monster Mash exterior. The making of this cult classic involved copyright dodges, genuine child terror captured on film, and connections to Hollywood blockbusters you'd never expect. Here are 15 weird facts you didn't know about The Monster Squad. Fact 1. Liam Neeson almost played Dracula. Before Liam Neeson became the action star we know today from films like Taken and Schindler's List, he was still working his way up in Hollywood back in 1986. At that time, on The Monster Squad was casting the role of Count Dracula, and Neeson decided to throw his hat in the ring for what would become one of the film's most memorable villain performances. What happened next was one of those interesting almost moments in movie history that could have changed everything about how we remember this cult classic today. Neeson walked into the audition and apparently blew everyone away with his take on the famous vampire Count. The casting directors were so impressed with his performance that they were ready to sign him on the spot for the role. In fact, they essentially told him the part was his, and for a brief moment, Liam Neeson was going to be the Dracula of The Monster Squad. But then something unexpected happened that changed the entire trajectory of the film's casting process. An actor Duncan Regehr came into audition after Neeson, and his interpretation of Dracula was so powerful and compelling that it completely shifted the decision. Regehr brought a different energy to the character, blending elements of classic Dracula performances from actors like Christopher Lee, Bela Lugosi, and Frank Langella into something unique. Director Fred Dekker later said that Regehr had a little bit of everything they were looking for in the role. The casting team made the difficult choice to go with Regehr instead, and his performance would eventually be voted by Wizard magazine as the best depiction of Dracula ever captured on film. Here's where things get really interesting, though. Even though Liam Neeson never appeared in The Monster Squad and didn't film a single scene, he was still financially compensated for the role. The production paid him out despite the last-minute casting change, which was an unusual but classy move that acknowledged how close he'd come to landing the part. Fact 2. The Gill-Man suit saved Predator. The creature suit that Matt Rose and Steve Wang built for The Monster Squad ended up rescuing one of the biggest action movies of 1987, and it happened completely by accident. While working on The Monster Squad at Stan Winston Studio in late 1986, Rose and Wang were tasked with creating the Gill-Man, their version of the creature from the Black Lagoon, and they developed some groundbreaking techniques that would change movie history. The suit they designed used innovative construction methods and cable controllers that allowed for more realistic movement than previous creature costumes. And these technological advances caught the attention of people working on other projects at the studio. At the exact same time The Monster Squad was in production, another film was in serious trouble down in Mexico, and that film was Predator. The production had started with a completely different alien design, featuring Jean-Claude Van Damme inside a long-limbed creature with the face of a praying mantis. But that suit proved totally impractical for shooting in the jungle, and the entire production was on the verge of falling apart. Producer Joel Silver made an emergency call to Stan Winston, who was already juggling The Monster Squad and pre-production on Pumpkinhead, asking if he could save Predator by designing and building an entirely new alien creature in just 8 weeks. According to the effects team, they actually tried to talk Winston out of taking the job because the timeline seemed impossible. But Winston agreed to help his friend, and he immediately brought in the same crew members who were proving their skills on The Monster Squad. Because Rose and Wang had just demonstrated their ability to create a functional, believable creature suit with the Gill-Man, they were entrusted with building the iconic Predator suit that would feature in one of the most successful action franchises of all time. The irony is that people at Stan Winston Studio initially viewed The Monster Squad as the less important project, with one crew member later admitting that those working on Predator were considered the red-headed stepchildren, while everyone thought The Monster Squad was the really cool show to be on. Autobot Predator became a massive hit, while The Monster Squad bombed at the box office, earning less than $4 million. Fact 3. 5-year-old Ashley Bank rejected Fatal Attraction. In 1986, when casting was underway for the Monster Squad, a 5-year-old actress named Ashley Bank had to make a choice that most kids her age never face. She'd been offered a role in Fatal Attraction, the intense psychological thriller that would go on to become one of the biggest films of 1987, starring Michael Douglas and Glenn Close in career-defining performances. Instead, Ashley chose to play Phoebe, the sweet little sister desperately trying to join her brother's monster hunting club in what was then just another low-budget creature feature that nobody expected would become a cult classic. The decision seems almost unbelievable when you consider what Fatal Attraction became. The film earned over $320 million worldwide and received 6 Academy Award nominations, including Best Picture. Glenn Close's performance as the obsessed Alex Forrest became iconic, and the movie dominated cultural conversations for years. Meanwhile, the Monster Squad barely made back a quarter of its budget during its theatrical run and seemed destined to be forgotten. But for a 5-year-old child, the choice made perfect sense. Fatal Attraction was a dark, adult-oriented thriller dealing with infidelity, obsession, and violence, while the Monster Squad offered the chance to befriend Frankenstein's monster and battle classic creatures in a kid-friendly adventure. Ashley's role as Phoebe would become one of the film's most memorable elements, particularly her genuine friendship with the misunderstood monster and her pure-hearted bravery in the face of danger. Looking back decades later, the choice proved meaningful in its own way. While Fatal Attraction remains a well-known film, the Monster Squad developed an intensely devoted fan base that has kept it alive through reunions, special screenings, and a feature-length documentary about its cultural impact. Ashley Banks' Phoebe became a beloved character for generations of fans who discovered the film through home video and cable television, proving that sometimes the road less traveled leads somewhere special after all. Fact 4. That terrified scream was 100% real. One of the most memorable moments in the Monster Squad happens when the evil Count Dracula grabs 5-year-old Phoebe and lifts her high into the air, and the little girl lets out an absolutely blood-curdling scream that feels genuinely terrifying. What makes this scene so effective is that the fear you hear in that scream wasn't acting at all. It was completely real, and the production captured Ashley Banks' authentic terror in just one take. Throughout the entire filming process, actor Duncan Regehr, who played Dracula, made the deliberate choice to stay in character and costume as much as possible to maintain the dark, menacing atmosphere of his villainous role. This commitment to his character had an unintended side effect on the young cast members, especially the youngest actress on set. While Ashley Bank, who was only 5 years old during production, found Regehr's full Dracula makeup absolutely terrifying. She would see him coming in his cape and costume with the red contact lenses and fake fangs, and she would literally run in the opposite direction to avoid him. Director Fred Dekker knew he needed to get a genuinely frightened reaction from Ashley for this crucial scene, but he also understood that he couldn't traumatize the little girl in the process. So Duncan Regehr made a compromise. He removed his sharp fangs and took out one of his red contact lenses before the scene, making his appearance slightly less frightening for the young actress. Even with these modifications, Ashley was still nervous about what was going to happen. When she asked Dekker when she should scream, he simply told her, "Oh, you'll know," and then proceeded to film the scene without giving her any other warning or direction. The platform Ashley was standing on suddenly lifted her up into the air, and in that unexpected moment, her natural fear of the imposing figure in front of her came rushing out in that piercing scream. The reaction was so authentic and powerful that Dekker knew immediately he had captured exactly what he needed, and the scene was completed in that single take without requiring any additional attempts or performances. Fact 5. Universal rejected their own monsters. Here's one of the strangest ironies in Hollywood history. Universal Studios, the company that created and owned the iconic movie, monsters like Dracula, Frankenstein's monster, the Wolfman, the Mummy, and the creature from the Black Lagoon, are actually turned down the Monster Squad when the filmmakers approached them with the project. Director Fred Dekker and co-writer Shane Black had specifically crafted their film as a love letter to those classic Universal monster movies from the 1930s and 40s, hoping to bring those beloved creatures back to the big screen for a new generation of fans. But when they pitched the idea to Universal, the studio said no, leaving the production team scrambling to figure out how they could make a monster movie without the legal rights to use the actual monster designs. This rejection created a massive legal and creative challenge for the special effects team at Stan Winston Studio. They needed to create monsters that audiences would instantly recognize as Dracula, Frankenstein's monster, the Wolfman, the Mummy, and the Gilman. But the creatures couldn't look too similar to Universal's copyrighted designs, or they'd end up in court facing serious legal consequences. Legendary special effects artist Stan Winston explained the delicate situation in an interview, saying that although they were doing a movie that was clearly inspired by the Universal classics, none of their designs could infringe on the original designs of those Universal characters, so they had to make subtle changes to ensure that nothing about the creatures could be considered copyright infringement. The team got incredibly creative with these modifications to stay on the right side of the law. Dracula lost his distinctive widow's peak hairline that Bela Lugosi had made famous. Frankenstein's monster had his iconic neck bolts relocated to his temples instead. The Wolfman received a more angular, a wolf-like face with pointier ears. The Mummy appeared far more decayed and skeletal than Universal's wrapped version. Even the creature from the Black Lagoon became the Gilman, with designers carefully crafting a unique appearance. Ironically, Universal's rejection forced the team to create what many fans consider even better, more frightening versions of these classic monsters. Fact 6. Shane Black's opening would cost more than the entire budget. When Shane Black sat down to co-write The Monster Squad with director Fred Dekker in the mid-1980s, he wasn't thinking small. Black, who would go on to become one of Hollywood's highest-paid screenwriters, had just finished working on the script for Lethal Weapon, and his imagination was running wild with epic possibilities for how to open this monster movie. According to Fred Dekker, Black's original vision for the film's opening sequence was so ambitious and over the top that it would have bankrupted the entire production before a single frame of the main story was even shot. In Black's first draft, the opening scene set in 1887 Transylvania wasn't just Van Helsing and a few men trying to stop Dracula with a magical amulet. Instead, Black envisioned the legendary vampire hunter arriving at Dracula's castle in a massive zeppelin equipped with machine guns, leading an army of 40 vampire brides on horseback racing across the landscape to meet him in battle. It was essentially a full-scale war scene with gothic horror elements, complete with aerial assaults and cavalry charges that would have looked more at home in a big-budget World War I epic than in a kids versus monsters adventure film. When Dekker saw the script, he had to immediately pump the brakes on his friend's grand ambitions. In the 2007 DVD documentary Monster Squad Forever, Dekker recalled his reaction to Black's opening, saying he told him they simply couldn't make it because those first 5 minutes alone would cost somewhere around $100 million. The problem was that the Monster Squad's entire production budget was only $14 million, which meant Black's opening sequence would have cost roughly 7 times more than what they had to spend on the whole movie. The final film scaled things back dramatically, showing Van Helsing and just a handful of men attempting to use the amulet against Dracula in a much simpler castle interior scene. While audiences never got to see those zeppelins and vampire brides, Black's wild imagination at least showed how seriously he took the classic monster mythology, even if reality had to rein in his blockbuster instincts. Fact 7. The Wolfman's face was modeled after Stan Winston. When it came time to design the Wolfman for the Monster Squad, special effects legend Stan Winston ended up lending more than just his creative vision to the project. He literally lent his own face. The creature's distinctive angular features and bone structure were directly modeled after Winston's own facial characteristics, making the Wolfman a surprisingly personal creation for the effects master who was already becoming a Hollywood icon in 1987. This wasn't a deliberate choice from the start, but rather something that evolved during the design process at Stan Winston's studio. Winston had created initial sketches for all the monsters that would appear in the film, and when it came time to sculpt and build the Wolfman, his team naturally drew inspiration from the person leading the project. The result was a werewolf that looked noticeably different from Universal's original Wolfman, which was essential since the studio didn't have rights to use Universal's exact designs. Where the classic Universal Wolfman had a broader, more human-like face, the Monster Squad's version was far more angular and lupine, with sharper features and a more menacing appearance that some crew members noted bore a striking resemblance to Winston himself. Actor Carl Thibault, who wore the Wolfman costume and performed the role, later revealed in interviews that he didn't discover this connection until after production wrapped. He mentioned that when he auditioned for the part, the casting team might have been looking for someone with similar bone structure to Winston, since the suit was already being designed with those specific facial proportions in mind. Thibault said that he found out later that Stan Winston designed the Wolfman based on his own face, and perhaps they were seeking an actor whose features would work well with a costume built around Winston's distinctive facial structure. This personal touch added an unintentional layer of artistry to the creature, as Winston's own visage became immortalized as one of cinema's classic monsters, even if most viewers never realized they were looking at a stylized version of the effects master himself. Fact 8. Tom Woodruff Jr. had his own body cast ready. Tom Woodruff Jr. had always dreamed of being inside a monster suit, and when the Monster Squad came along in 1986, he saw his chance to make that dream a reality. At the time, Woodruff was already working as part of Stan Winston's special effects team on the film, assigned to sculpt and design Frankenstein's monster. But what he really wanted was to play the Gilman, the film's version of the creature from the Black Lagoon, which was his absolute favorite movie monster. The problem was that Woodruff was naturally shy and introverted when it came to promoting himself or his work, so he knew approaching Stan Winston about playing the creature would take some courage. But he couldn't let this opportunity pass him by. As luck would have it, Woodruff had recently done something unusual in his spare time that would end up being the perfect selling point. He had created a full-body cast of himself, molded to fit his exact proportions, just for fun while planning to build a gorilla suit as a personal project. The cast was already standing in Winston's shop, ready to go. Woodruff later recalled the moment he pitched himself for the role, saying he distinctly remembered sitting in Stan's shop, pointing to that body cast and telling Winston that he could do it, that he could play the Gilman. He knew that appealing to Winston's business sense might work in his favor, since having a pre-made body cast would save valuable production time and money. Winston agreed, and the Monster Squad became Woodruff's first credited acting role. The decision turned out to be a smart one for everyone involved. Woodruff went on to spend the next 20 years as an in-suit actor, playing creatures in major films, and eventually won an Oscar for Best Visual Effects for the 1992 film Death Becomes Her. It all started because he had made a body cast of himself just for the fun of it. Fact 9. The Gilman got brutally beat for real. Playing the Gilman in the Monster Squad wasn't just uncomfortable for Tom Woodruff Jr., it was actually painful and sometimes dangerous. During the film's climactic battle scene, several actors playing townspeople and sheriff's deputies had to attack the creature with clubs and batons, and what looked like harmless movie props on screen turned out to be genuinely punishing weapons in real life. The props were designed with soft foam or rubber on the outside to look safe, but they had hard metal or wooden cores inside to maintain their shape and give them realistic weight when the actors swung them, which meant every hit that connected with Woodruff inside the suit delivered a real impact. Sculptor Matt Rose, who worked on creating the Gilman costume, later recalled watching the brutal filming process and feeling concerned for Woodruff's safety. Between takes, Woodruff would speak up through the mask, politely asking the actors to ease up a bit and not hit quite so hard. But his requests apparently didn't make much difference. Rose remembered that the actors just kept wailing on him take after take, and Woodruff had to endure the repeated beatings because the scene required multiple shots from different angles to look convincing on camera. The limited visibility inside the creature suit made it even worse because Woodruff couldn't always see the hits coming or properly brace himself for impact. The situation finally reached a breaking point during one particularly difficult take when Woodruff, unable to see clearly through the Gillman mask and presumably fed up with being clubbed repeatedly, accidentally threw a punch that connected squarely with one of the larger stuntmen's face. Rose vividly recalled the moment, saying the stuntman fell like a sack of potatoes, straight on his backside. The accidental knockout wasn't intentional revenge, but it certainly made everyone on set more aware of just how difficult and physically demanding Woodruff's job inside that creature suit really was, and it probably made the other actors think twice before swinging quite so enthusiastically in the remaining takes. Fact 10. Universal homages hidden throughout the film. The Monster Squad is absolutely packed with hidden tributes to the classic Universal monster movies that inspired it, and if you look closely enough, you'll spot these clever Easter eggs scattered throughout the film. Director Fred Dekker and co-writer Shane Black grew up obsessed with those old black and white horror classics, so they made sure to honor their childhood heroes in subtle ways that only true monster movie fans would catch. Right at the beginning of the film, when Count Dracula arrives in America, he steps off an airplane that has the word Browning painted on its side. This isn't just a random airline name, it's a direct reference to Todd Browning, the legendary director who helmed the 1931 version of Dracula, starring Bela Lugosi. That film basically defined how audiences would picture the Count for generations to come, so giving Browning this quiet nod was the filmmaker's way of paying respect to the man who started it all. It's such a brief moment that most viewers miss it completely on their first watch, but once you know it's there, it feels like a secret handshake between the movie and its most dedicated fans. Later in the film, when the Monster Squad kids are studying a map trying to locate Dracula's castle, there's a signpost visible that reads Chaney College. This is another carefully placed homage, this time honoring Lon Chaney Jr., the actor who played Larry Talbot in the original 1941 Wolfman movie. Chaney's portrayal of the tragic werewolf became iconic, and his performance influenced every werewolf movie that came after it, including the Monster Squad's own take on the character. But the Easter eggs don't stop there. If you pay attention to the walls of the kids' treehouse clubhouse, you'll spot posters for other horror classics like Lucio Fulci's Zombie and Dan O'Bannon's Return of the Living Dead hanging in the background. These weren't just random decoration choices, they were deliberate selections that showed exactly what kind of horror fans these kids were supposed to be. And the filmmakers wanted viewers to understand that this wasn't just some casual interest for the Monster Squad. These kids lived and breathed monster movies just like Dekker and Black did when they were growing up. Fact 11. It bombed against The Lost Boys. The Monster Squad arrived in theaters on August 14th, 1987, with high hopes from TriStar Pictures. But what happened next became one of the most brutal box office failures of the decade. The film opened at number 12 in its first weekend, pulling in just $2.9 million across 1,280 theaters nationwide. To put that in perspective, the movie had cost $14 million to make, meaning it would need to earn at least that much just to break even before anyone could even think about profits. By the second weekend, things got even worse. The numbers dropped so dramatically that the film was averaging a dismal $696 per screen, which is an incredibly low figure that signals audiences simply weren't showing up. Theater owners started pulling the movie from their screens almost immediately, and after just 2 weeks in theaters, the Monster Squad vanished with a final domestic total of only $3.77 million. That meant the film didn't even make back 1/3 of what it cost to produce, making it a genuine financial disaster for everyone involved. The timing couldn't have been worse for the film because it had been released just 2 weeks after The Lost Boys hit theaters on July 31st, 1987. The Lost Boys was also a monster movie aimed at young audiences. But it had an R rating that made it feel edgier and more appealing to teenagers who wanted something darker. That film became a massive hit and completely dominated the conversation around horror movies that summer, leaving The Monster Squad looking like a copycat or a watered-down alternative by comparison. The film's PG-13 rating may have actually hurt it because younger kids couldn't see it without parents, while older teens dismissed it as too tame and chose The Lost Boys instead. Director Fred Dekker later said he had no idea people even liked his movie until a special screening 19 years later in 2006, because the box office failure was so complete that he assumed everyone had simply forgotten it existed. Fact 12. Stephen Macht is Gabriel Macht's real father. When Stephen Macht signed on to play Detective Del Crenshaw in The Monster Squad back in 1986, he was already a well-established television and film actor with a career spanning over a decade. But what many fans of the cult classic don't realize is that he would eventually share the screen with his son in one of television's most successful legal dramas. Stephen's son, Gabriel Macht, would go on to become a household name, playing the sharp-tongued lawyer Harvey Specter on the USA Network series Suits, which ran for 9 seasons from 2011 to 2019. The father-son connection makes Stephen's role as Sean's concerned detective father in The Monster Squad even more interesting in retrospect, as he was playing a dad on screen while raising his own son who would follow him into the acting profession. Gabriel Macht was only around 4 years old when his father was filming The Monster Squad, and growing up with an actor for a father clearly influenced his career path, as he would make his own acting debut just a few years later. The younger Macht eventually trained at the prestigious Carnegie Mellon University and built an impressive career in both film and television before landing his breakout role as Harvey Specter. What makes their relationship even more special is that Stephen Macht wasn't just Gabriel's father off-screen, but he actually appeared as a recurring character on Suits alongside his son. Stephen portrayed Professor Henry Gerard, a legal ethics professor at Harvard Law School who becomes one of the few people aware of Mike Ross's secret about not having a legitimate law degree. Stephen appeared in 6 episodes across multiple seasons of Suits, and his character both clashed with and teamed up with Harvey on several occasions, creating some memorable scenes between the real-life father and son. Gabriel has mentioned in interviews that his father would coach him in his role as Professor Gerard, joking that the student had become the teacher. The Monster Squad may have been a box office disappointment in 1987, but Stephen Macht's career continued to flourish, and decades later, he got to work with his son on one of the biggest shows on cable television. Fact 13. 13 minutes of footage was cut when TriStar Pictures agreed to release The Monster Squad in 1987. Studio executives had one firm demand that would significantly alter the final cut of the film. They insisted that director Fred Dekker deliver a movie running under 90 minutes, which was considered the ideal length for a family-friendly action comedy at the time. This strict runtime requirement meant that Dekker and his team had to make some painful decisions about what to leave on the cutting room floor, ultimately removing 13 minutes of footage from the original cut. The deleted material wasn't just throwaway scenes or unnecessary filler. According to Dekker, many of these cut sequences added important character development and context to the story, on particularly scenes that explored the troubled marriage between Sean's parents, which was a subplot running throughout the film. Executive producer Peter Hyams believed that trimming these more serious dramatic moments would make the movie more tonally consistent and keep the focus on the monster-fighting adventure, though Dekker himself disagreed with that assessment and felt the emotional depth added to the overall experience. Some of the deleted scenes that fans have identified include an extended opening sequence showing exactly how Dracula was resurrected when one of Van Helsing's men accidentally pulls the stake from his chest, a longer comedy routine between the 2 World War II bomber pilots transporting the monster coffins, additional scenes of the kids debating what qualifies as being a virgin, and a moment where Phoebe's mother talks to her about a television show that contains too much sexual content. There was also extra footage during the Rock Until You Drop montage showing the squad gathering weapons and tools for their final battle against the monsters. While these scenes were initially lost to theatrical audiences, Many of them were restored when the film aired on cable television networks like TNT in 2004. The additional footage gave fans a more complete picture of what Decker originally envisioned, though the scenes have never been officially restored to home video releases. The 13-minute reduction remains one of the more frustrating compromises made during the film's production, leaving viewers to wonder how the Monster Squad might have been received differently with its full runtime intact. Fact 14. The Mummy was cast from a Verge of Anorexic ad. When casting directors need to fill unusual roles in Hollywood, they sometimes have to get creative with their job listings, and the Monster Squad's search for someone to play the Mummy turned into one of the strangest casting calls of 1987. The production team wasn't looking for just any actor to bring their version of the ancient Egyptian monster to life. They needed someone with a very specific body type that would make the character look genuinely skeletal and decayed, completely different from the more robust versions audiences had seen in Universal's classic monster movies. Stan Winston's special effects team had designed a mummy that appeared far more haggard and deteriorated than previous versions, with visible bone structure showing through tattered bandages, and that meant they needed an actor whose natural frame could sell that gaunt, withered appearance without requiring excessive prosthetics or padding. The casting advertisement that eventually appeared in Variety magazine was remarkably blunt about what the production needed, reading something along the lines of, "Wanted, male to play mummy, must be extremely thin on the verge of anorexic." For actor Michael Reed MacKay, who had always been naturally very thin throughout his life, this unusual job posting turned out to be his golden ticket into professional acting. MacKay later recalled in a 2017 interview with Yahoo News that he didn't even see the ad himself. Instead, a friend of his spotted the tiny listing in the trade publication and immediately thought of him, recognizing that his slender build was exactly what the filmmakers were seeking. MacKay auditioned for the role and landed it, making the Monster Squad his very first professional acting job in the film industry. The unconventional casting approach paid off perfectly, as MacKay's naturally thin frame allowed the creature effects team to create a mummy that looked authentically skeletal and ancient, giving the character a uniquely unsettling appearance that stood out from other monster movie versions and helped make the Monster Squad's creature designs memorable even decades later. Fact 15. Horace Actor died at 22. Before the cult revival of all the young actors who brought the Monster Squad to life in 1987, Brent Chalem left one of the most lasting impressions as Horace, the lovable kid everyone called Fat Kid, who proved himself a hero when it mattered most. His delivery of the line, "Wolfman's got nards," after kicking the creature between the legs, became the most quoted moment from the entire film, a battle cry that would echo through decades of fan conventions and midnight screenings. But tragically, Brent never got to witness how much his performance would come to mean to millions of fans around the world. Born in Westlake Village, California in 1975, Brent was a popular child actor throughout the 1980s, though most of his roles were small parts in television shows like Quantum Leap, Mr. Belvedere, and Punky Brewster. The Monster Squad gave him his most significant role, and he endured 4 separate auditions before finally landing the part of Horace. After his brief acting career wound down in the late 80s, Brent chose a completely different path and began studying law while working as a legal assistant for a law firm in the United States. He had graduated from UC Berkeley with a degree in environmental science and seemed to be building a promising new career far away from Hollywood. On December 9, 1997, Brent Chalem died from pneumonia in Henderson, Nevada, at just 22 years old. His death received almost no media coverage at the time, and many devoted fans of the Monster Squad wouldn't learn about his passing until years later. The timing made his loss even more heartbreaking because it came nearly a decade before the film's major cult revival began in 2006, and when the first reunion screening at the Alamo Drafthouse in Austin proved just how beloved the movie had become. By 2007, when the special edition DVD was released with extensive documentaries and tributes, Brent's co-stars remembered him warmly in interviews, honoring both his talent and the joy he brought to everyone around him during filming.